Hi, you're all very welcome, everyone. And Sebastian I've just had a text. He will be with us imminently.
Awesome.
So hopefully the link will work, but we'll make a start. Nice to see everyone. You're very welcome joining us the last of our After Effects program, which has been running for the last 5 weeks as part of our Many Europes, the Internationale project, which NCAD is a partner in. It's been a really rich and rewarding program. And if there's anything that you've missed, just to say it's online and can be accessed through the NCAD in public sites. So do go back, and there are a number of really, really interesting discussions and performances and events that are worth heading back to. So, but coming into this afternoon's conversation about intergenerational legacies, delighted to welcome our speakers, Annie Fletcher, who is Director of IMMA. Hi Annie, and thanks so much for joining us on a Saturday afternoon after a very busy week. And Amira Akbıyıkoğlu, who's joining us from SALT in Istanbul. And Amira, in our original plans for the After Effects program, you were due to come to Dublin and be with us in Dublin and do some research. So hopefully we can, in pre-COVID times, that was all planned, but had to be cancelled at short notice. And hopefully we'll be able to do that again at some point and welcome you to Dublin, but it's lovely to welcome you virtually. And Sebastian, who is the Chief Curator of the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, is joining us imminently, according to my text, but we'll make a start. SALT, and excuse me, because I'm going to have to keep an eye on, he's texting me while I'm talking to you, so if there's urgent messages from him, sorry. He will be with us. SALT and the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, where Sebastian is joining us from, are both partners in the Internationale network. So we wanted to just end this After Effects program looking from a more institutional perspective at some of the core themes that have underlined the whole program, and namely the relationship and understanding of our recent past and the importance of that in framing our contemporary, and the spaces through which the histories of practice, which can be very specific to a particular context, can be understood through and brought into a more global narrative through networks like the Internationale. And Amira and Sebastian and Annie have all worked on curatorial projects where the kind of focus and research into very particular practices has then been brought into these wider conversations and really, really fruitful collaboration through the Internationale network. And one of the kind of key questions that's been underlying a lot of the program through the After Effects is where these histories are held, how we look back to practices, whether that's through the artists' archives that are held in organisations such as NIVAL, or in artist-run spaces like the Project Art Centre, or through the more institutional collections like the National Collection held in IMMA. Where do we find these histories? Where do we find these stories? How do we hold them, and how do we bring them into our contemporary understanding, into the lens of the contemporary? And IMMA, the Museum of Modern Art, and SALT all have very different curatorial strategies that they've used to investigate the specifics of practice within their local context, but through the wider networks Hi, Sebastian.
Hi. Hi, sorry for being late, but this
don't
is
worry, not at all. It's lovely to see
like
you. Very welcome. Just introducing, but we'll just move into the conversation and bring you in when we can, if that's okay. So I was just saying the kind of commonality between Warsaw, SALT and IMMA is a number of kind of curatorial projects where you've looked to specific moments in history in your local context, but use those to frame an understanding of a kind of global narrative, but also what's happening in the space in your time. And I know that's something that's particularly relevant to your work in Poland, Sebastian. We'd like to kind of talk to you a little bit about as we go into the conversation. So we're going to keep this afternoon very informal and a sort of conversation between us all, with time at the end for questions through the Q&A. So if people do have questions, because it's a webinar and they can't be live, you just use the Q&A format, but we'll see them. So I'm going to start with Annie and ask, first of all, say happy birthday to Imma, because it was Imma's birthday last week, I think, was it?
I know, 25th, coming up.
25th, coming up. I should know, but knew it was on the horizon. I can't believe it's 30 years. It makes me feel very old, because when I moved to Ireland in '95 to work in IMMA, it was the new institution. It was still hadn't even hit its 5th birthday. So to think now that it's celebrating the 30th, but this focus on that 30-year span and looking back to the moment of IMMA's starting in 1991 is a really core focus of your program this year, and you're particularly through a major exhibition where you're using the IMMA collection to really look at this position of IMMA within the new global contemporary, which emerged at the same time as IMMA in the early 90s, and the major exhibition through through the narrow gate of the here and now, using a Boris Gross quote as a starting point. I wonder if you could just talk us through a little bit of the plans for that, Annie, and the approach for thinking about the 30th.
Sure, thanks so much. And it's just lovely to see our international colleagues as well online, Sebastian and Amira. It's really, really great. I think that's the point somehow for me of internationality has been so fruitful and important in my professional life. But I think in that opportunity to do that kind of comparative, to understand those kind of the possibility of unearthing kind of very located narratives within a kind of global context. And it's through the generosity actually of our fellow curators and the willingness to kind of exchange that I think is truly the gift of internationality and what keeps on giving. So I'm so pleased that we're sort of back into this conversation again. To that end, I thought I could show some funny things and some interesting things in relation to that idea of what the show itself will be. So if I can share my screen for a second, I just will pick up that idea of our birthday. In fact, the idea, that indeed we are going into, can you see that now?
Yep. Yeah, but not
the timeline.
Can't see the timeline. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay, yes. Sorry. So this is our very rambunctious sort of celebration of our IMMA 30 years. And it's designed by Niall Sweeney, who I know presented as part of Aftereffects, and is, I think, a very interesting and important designer and activist and organizer, particularly in thinking our queer communities in relation to kind of creativity. Also just a fantastic guy. So he's helped us to try and conceive of this. And so, of course, it is an incredible moment to look at these 30 years and to try and start understanding indeed what that legacy of the 90s was, and really how it shaped obviously where we're going now. And just to that end, I mean, we did the kind of classic idea of a timeline, I suppose, that many people do, which is to kind of think very much about, you know, not only the narrative of the institution itself, but how it relates to that idea of the global contemporary. So I just thought for fun, it might allow us to kind of locate a little bit. And of course, this is a totally partial timeline. Others, for everything we put in, we've forgotten 101 things, I'm quite sure. But what we tried to do was really look at global moments as well as moments in Irish history, some that you know, are really profound, obviously things that we all know, like but sometimes we forget, and I suppose it's that thinking of the recent past in relation to that idea of forgetting and always being in the present, and that really is so, I think, for me, so informative in relation to how we think the internationality, but how I'm really trying to think the role of the museum in the next year, dealing with that history. So I don't know if you can actually read much of this, but I mean, you know,
zoom in just a
I might try and zoom in a little bit more.
Yeah,
but I mean, in a very simple and very partial way, we're looking at the idea of the World Wide Web gaining popularity, Maastricht Treaty, obviously super profound. Condoms go on sale illegally in Virgin Megastore in Ireland, just so that we remember where we came from in relation to kind of really repressive sort of Catholic theocracy still having its grip, but a beginning of a kind of an unleashing of other kind of activism against that. And then, of course, this wonderful moment of IMMA opening, and all kinds of artworks. But we also tried to think very much about Ireland and art and the artwork in relation to that incredible moment of global opening up, what was going on, as we know, in very simplistically, we can talk about it as a shift in relation to globality and mobility. And so we were constantly trying to think. We mentioned that the MMK in Frankfurt opened up the next year in '92. Vasif, the wonderful Vasif Kortun, did the '93 Istanbul Biennale, which I think was a really profound Biennale. So we're constantly trying to link to kind of the great shifts and movements, as I said, in a completely partial way, but we're trying to segue in between the changes and the things that are important for Ireland at that moment, what the museum chose to do and activate over that period, and kind of a fantastic conversation with an attempt to understand a global art world at that time. And you really do see that. You see that kind of great opening up on some level. I mean, there's some really profound things that you can see in the societal shift in Ireland. Obviously, the X case, the beginning of a really firm activism around abortion rights and reproductive rights for women, which just in a way I feel scarred the entire dialogue in the 90s in Ireland. But also really important ideas of the peace process in Northern Ireland, really fundamental core sort of legislative and political change that affected us massively. So that's, anyway, it's fun. I hope people can come up and have a look at it in IMMA. It's going to open just for our birthday, but it's just that context, or that attempting to grapple. And I think you'll see that we include both the SALT and the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw in this timeline as important pivotal institutions. And for me, it's a nod to appreciating indeed those international dialogues that the Internationale brings with. So, I mean, that's anyway, just something kind of joyful to see, but it really does kind of define a little bit, I suppose, what we decided to do this year. And I took this title from Boris Groys. I mean, it's obviously, he's a really interesting and wonderful theorist, and this is quite an old essay. It's from 2009. But I thought it was great in relation to this idea of after effects in recent histories, because he's talking in the essay Comrades of Time about what it means to be always in the contemporary. And so just to that end, and maybe to explain that, I thought I'd just read a quick quote from him and just explain a little bit how it's framing the show itself. Because I think it's very important in that it calls us to order around what we understand to be always in that contemporary moment. So he says, "Now, it seems to me that the present is initially something that hinders us in our realization of everyday or non-everyday projects, something that prevents our smooth transition from the past to the future, something that obstructs us, makes our hopes and plans become not opportune, not up to date, or simply impossible to realize. Time and again, we're obliged to say, yes, this is a good project, but at the moment we have no money, no time, no energy, and so forth to realize it. Or this tradition is a wonderful one, but at the moment there's no interest in it and nobody wants to continue it. Or this utopia is beautiful, but unfortunately today nobody believes in utopias, and so on. The present is a moment in time when we decide to lower our expectations of the future, or to abandon some of the dear traditions of the past in order to pass through the narrow gate of the here now. And so I was just intrigued by this idea of the narrow gate of the here now, that it's this little window. And I thought, of the absurdity of insisting that we're endlessly in the contemporary, and look at that timeline, what that means to have changed and changed and changed. And I think it's also a very neoliberal argument, of course, to be endlessly in presentism. But I also think contemporary art needs to grapple with that idea too, of the insistence always of the here now. And that, I think, is a big part of, I would say, the intellectual project of the museum and the archive, and the considering of those things. And so we're going to do a huge project that actually takes over the whole museum for a year. As with everybody, COVID has stopped us and started us endlessly, but we're starting the first part of it in July. And it will be kind of 4 chapters that kind of unroll and unfold throughout the museum until in November. And at that point, we hope that the show will stay up for considerable time. So it's really trying to, it's quite narrative. It's definitely trying to dare to narrate a kind of a story of Ireland within that global, in the absurdity of always being in the contemporary or pretending to be. And so it really kind of is a challenge for all of our curators to dare to be that narrative somehow. And I think, so that's what we're busy with. And the first chapter, my colleagues are all developing it with me, many curators from the museum. It's a big collaborative project. And the first chapter is developed by Sean Cassan. We're still arguing about the title of the chapter, but I think it is definitely to do with a kind of a legislative moment, and really how the state narrates in relation to the body and sexuality, but also just in terms of life. So it's quite quite political, but also really intriguing to look at what kind of collections and works IMMA has that might help tell that story. So I might just share the screen very quickly and then I'll stop talking, just to show you some of the images that we're kind of looking at right now. I hope I can flip between many of these. This is a work that we just bought for our collection. Can you see that? It's
yes.
It's still from the film of Vivian Dick. That amazing show that was developed under your watch, Sarah. And Vivian Dick was just an extraordinary filmmaker who came back to Ireland from New York in the, I suppose in the 90s. And she's really, you know, engaged with people like Nan Golden and very much part of that kind of post-punk new wave film tradition, but also grappling with that idea. So this is an incredible moment of thinking about her kind of community in New York, and then somehow interspersed with this idea of coming back to Ireland, dealing with, you know, the completely cosmopolitan center of New York, and then the Pope's visit to Ireland at the same time. And there's something incredible about this zooming, about the dynamism between these things that she's sort of trying to understand, and that locatedness and that globalness as well. Another work we're going to show, can you see this? Have I changed the screen? Yeah, great. Okay, is Klein Kuhn. Again, I'm sure, Sarah, you know this very well. It just feels like a very prescient work right now as we're all freaking out about not being able to live in Dublin and buy houses ever. It was a work developed on a residency here. And this is this incredible dynamic cutout of all the property pages in all the papers over a particular period. And just this, you know, incredible inflation of the property bubble, again, a legacy of neoliberalism, as we know. And unfortunately, it feels like we're right back into that now. So those are two pieces that are going to be in the show in that first chapter. Also a new acquisition for us. Now I might have to try and zoom this one out, I think, which is from Derek Jarman, from the wonderful show that Sean Cassan made last year, or the year before now, and it's called Sex Horror Bomb. And again, these are extraordinary works where he's contending with the AIDS epidemic, another epidemic, and what these are tabloid papers that are painted over with these huge paintings, very gestural and very visceral. And in fact, he's extremely ill at this moment. So this is really the last moment where he's literally dragging his hand through the paint and trying to contend with the, you know, appalling affliction. And then another recent purchase that we thought was just kind of extraordinary, it's a new discovery for me, is Patricia Hurl, the painter, an Irish painter who is again dealing with quite intense ideas about the state and its intervention into the possibilities of women's bodies throughout time. And they're small paintings, and I just think they're really quite exciting. This is another one that's kind of haunting, and these are quite early. They're from I think late 80s, early 90s. So that's just a quick snapshot of a little bit how we're dealing, and we're going to then go into maybe some of those big historical points we talked about, like the peace process in Northern Ireland, trying to look really at these chapters and at these transformations, combining sort of practices from Ireland and looking obviously within that kind of global tumult of what was happening in the art world. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're up to right now.
Thanks, Annie. Can't wait. It looks amazing. I'd be really excited about seeing the show. I think what you were saying in your quote from Boris Groys is just that idea of the present been about discarding the kind of tradition. That moment of making the choice to discard the tradition is very, very prescient when thinking about IMMA, because I think there was always that sort of tension in IMMA arriving with the ambitions of being a global institution in 1991 in a country, and I think the timeline will locate that history back, you know, a country, as you say, where still so much was being fought over. Divorce wasn't legal when it opened, homosexuality was still illegal, like really basic social rights were not in place in the country, and yet there was this kind of explosion of a museum looking to be a global institution, and that tension of the work that led up to it, the kind of history of practice in Ireland before that, the kind of context which it came to, and its aspirations to be an international global institution, has always been a real tension within IMMA. I wonder if that's something you've kind of talked about with the team. And
definitely. I mean, I think it's bigger than a tension. I think there's even sometimes an erasure. I think the embrace of the present is so kind of is really overdetermined. And the voicing of the contemporary project over and above any kind of archive. Sometimes I think I have that sense that there's quite a big tendency to romanticize the production of the new over everything else. So I think that's quite interesting.
It's great to see those kind of practices like Patricia Hurl's coming into the collection now. And Vivian Dick as an artist who couldn't have operated in Ireland. You know, she was a classic example of someone who recognized that she couldn't, in 80s Ireland or 70s Ireland when she left, she couldn't sustain any kind of practice. So she left, but always had that kind of pull back in terms of thinking about.
And that's painful, right? I think there's a real pain to it that we also need to deal with, you know, and that's where, I mean, it's so interesting with the distance of time to be able to start buying these things and to talk about them. But it's, I mean, that tension is partly around, I think, the grief, you know.
But great to also be able to bring works like Derek Jarman, which are so particular to a moment in Britain, and you know, those works were very problematized in Britain when they were made, and very few people showed them. They were seen as, you know, even at that moment in the early 90s, they were sort of 93, 94, when just before he died. There was endless plans for shows of those works, and they never happened because they were seen as too difficult, too fraught, but speak so much to what was also happening in Ireland at that time.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. That's what I'm enjoying so much, really making an effort to buy as much as we can. I mean, we were very, very lucky this year within the pandemic that the government sort of gave us considerable amount of money to buy work. But it is that tension also. They insisted it had to be Irish work. So I'm still trying to, you know, look down the back of the sofa for money to buy something else. And the gesture of Jarman, or just trying to, we've just bought a big piece by the Otholith group as well. I'm really excited by that. I'm really excited about this being the spine going forward, certainly. For me, it's just such an interesting dialogue, but it's dark. I can't say it's all absolutely joyful, you know, but I hope it'll be very powerful.
I might bring in Amira at this point, if because I think what's interesting also, and we might sort of reflect a bit on as we talk, but between sort of Dublin, Istanbul, Warsaw, none of these are kind of places that would have been seen as part of that sort of at the core of that global contemporary, but yet there was so I think that the institutions, as you look back to research into kind of moments of practice from the early 90s, which is a core kind of direction of this iteration of the Internationale project, there's that kind of interesting, again, slight tension between the specifics of the local and a slight sense of isolation from the global contemporary, but yet kind of becoming part of it.
If I could just say something, yes and no. On another level, that they were the symbol of everything, the excitement of like following what Vasov was doing, or the setting up of things in Istanbul or Tiny House in Cairo, or even just that total energized looking at Poland and what was coming out. So on some levels, I think it was the symbol, it was the sense of everything was changing in these cities and these places. For me anyway, certainly.
Yeah, we totally believe that Istanbul is like the capital of the universe, you know, for a long time.
I agree.
Yeah, that's true actually. Like I'm gonna talk like very briefly on the like half of the 80s, like the last half of the 80s, so which was actually very much welcomed by the curators and artists, but not only Turkish artists and curators, but foreign artists and curators as well. So yeah, maybe that's a good way to actually enter into the performance research of SALT.
Yeah, so Amira, you're working particularly at the moment within SALT. You're engaged in a fairly extensive research project looking at performance practice.
Yes, actually we have a quiet focused target here, because like what we are doing is actually revisiting some of the practices, tendencies and attitudes of the art in the 19th context, but especially dig into the often unrecorded history of the performance art through the archives of photographers, artists, and like various video footages, if possible. But what we kind of do is we have two steps. So first, because like performance art has gone unrecorded, like most of the places. So we are working on a website that will serve as an inventory, like let's say the genealogy of the performance art in Turkey, and will give you an idea on who is who. And like it's not our intention to actually give a total overview or like final picture of the history of, this is the history of the performance art in Turkey. We believe in the process rather than like the final outcome, but we want to give the researchers who will work on the performance art history in Turkey and a field to work on, an excavation area actually, like they can dig into, and also like an excavation area where they can actually do cross readings. So which means they can have this genealogy where dance and visual arts, like the performance art within the visual arts, and dance, and as we call it in Turkey, the alternative theater will come together on one unique project. So then the second step will be, if the pandemic allows us, to do an exhibition based on the research, but actually one of the interests, one of the focus of the exhibition will be to link the 19th, the legacy of the 19th, to the present day. So how the performance was televised during the 19th, and then how it was TikToked nowadays. So, and how we had the transvestites culture that went to the drag race culture and to lip sync culture. So it will be kind of like bringing this archival material and the contemporary material together. So but I just wanted to have because I'm not sure if everybody is like familiar with the Turkish context. So I just wanted to speak a bit about the 80s and then come to the 19th, and just I'm gonna be quick.
Okay.
So on 12 September 1918, the senior command of the Turkish army overthrew the government, and it was the third military coup in 30 years. So the first half of the 80s in Turkey was marked by a severe repression of the military rule, let's say. But the second half of the decade was, let's say, relatively relaxed. The rise of neoliberal capitalism, the dissolution of the Eastern Bloc, of course, in Europe, and impending globalization had all an impact on Turkey. But I'm gonna quote here the cultural critic Nurdan Gürbilek, because in her book, The New Cultural Climate in Turkey, Living in a Shop Window, she says, during those years, Turkey became the site of a great transformation, which the concept of repression alone cannot explain. Another way to put it is to say that repression came to the fore along with another strategy. Apparently, it's precise opposite, one promising freedom in the cultural sphere. So in the years after the coup, Istanbul suddenly acquired the character of a city of festivals. So 1987 marked the beginning of the International Istanbul Biennial, as you mentioned. And in 1989, the International Istanbul Theater Festival was initiated. So we have all these like the beginning of the institutions. So, and people like on the street, so what was happening on the street? People returned to the street and reclaimed the public space, actually. So on 17 May 1987, women in Turkey held a massive march for the first time in Istanbul. It was called Solidarity March Against Battering of Women. And as you might know, it is a still going like fight in Turkey, because we actually had like this very unpleasant update, and Turkey has withdrawn from the like Istanbul Convention recently. So on 15 April 1999, Sun Ra and his orchestra gave a legendary open-air concert on track on Istiklal Avenue as part of Positive Music's Positive Vibration contemporary music events. So the same Positive team opened Babylon Istanbul. Maybe you know this place. It's a very well-known music and performance venue, which opened almost a decade later in 1999. So, and I will also share in the discussion section, in the chat section, the clip of the Sun Ra's performance on track on Istiklal Avenue. Yeah. So there we are in 1990 in a very vibrant Istanbul. So in this context, a new generation of artists and a very fresh alternative scene emerged, driven by actually two distinct but interconnected camps. So on one hand, we had the students and graduates of fine art faculties who tended to experiment ephemeral new forms, especially performance art, of course. And it's important to mention that Fluxus was a major influence here in Turkey, and like they all wanted to deprivilege the work of art, but also the deprivilege the conventional exhibition format and making. So the exhibition locations, the medium was always chosen for these like specific, let's say, results. So these contemporary artists coming from the visual arts engage with the emerging artists of the performing art scene. And here I'm going to specify as dance and theater, modern dance and theater, because they were sharing various interests, concern, ideas, and spaces. So two important notes: the modern dance department of the State Academy in Istanbul was established also in 1992. So, and as for the formation of the young alternative theater groups, companies, they were like students who were either trained in classical training in theater departments, or like the ones in Boğaziçi University, they were students coming from disciplines such as sociology, literature, or engineering, but they were gathering in these universities' student clubs. So students' clubs were really an important node. And, you know, figures of these two distinct but interconnected groups, let's say, engaged with each other in Istanbul's very like vibrant underground nightlife, hanging out often at the same cafes, bars, and nightclubs. Or they shared the same rehearsal spaces and went to the same openings. So another important point of convergence was their embrace of interdisciplinary approach. So like this key term is really what defines the mood and events of the 19th in Turkey. So this, everything together led to an environment of collaboration and exchange, and a community based on interpersonal relations and emotional ties. So I will go quickly through three important actually organizations that stimulated this dialogue and united these artists, or these soon to become artists. So one is a series of festival exhibitions that started in 1995, which is called Youth Action. So in Turkish, it's Genç Etkinlik. So the annual Youth Action exhibitions had an eye towards creating an open platform for the young artists who wanted to experience new media. But it was an open call-based gathering with no jury selection and no competition, therefore no shortlist. Every application counted and was accepted in the final exhibition. And each year the exhibition took on a concept. The first year it was Borders and Beyond. The second year it was deterritorialization, like this was the mood of the 19th as well. And the third year was chaos. But the fourth year didn't have a concept, but it gave Turkey the most radical feminist performance of the decade. So SHMH, which means menstruation period in Kurdish, by a artist called I don't know, Jujin. It was her stage name, and she has never performed after that. So she had taken pills and delayed her period for days or even for weeks before the exhibition. So on the opening night, she was crouching naked. Her long hair was covering her face, and she was crouching naked on the corner of the booth that was reserved for her. And she was, of course, bleeding heavily because she kept receiving the pills. So I should also note that the name of the artist, the stage name Jujin, means a female hedgehog in Kurdish. So like taking into consideration the Kurdish-Turkish conflict that was going on in the area at the time, the piece comes as no surprise. And the second like self-managed festival that I want to mention is Performance Days. So a group of young artists founded an association called Interdisciplinary Young Artists Association the next year in 1996. And the same year, they initiated a self-managed festival called Performance Days, a program dedicated to performances for 5 consecutive days in its first year and 4 days in its second. I still believe this is one of the highlights of the decade, with a full focus on performance. And then we have the last case, which will actually take us to the periphery and will take us outside of Istanbul. So this is the Asus Performing Art Festival. Actually, it holds a canonical place for the cultural environment of the 19th in Turkey, since it was an experimental artist-initiated festival held in the Aegean Anatolia for 4 consecutive years, from 1995 until the last edition in 1998. But I mean, sadly, a lot of attention has been devoted to the annual gathering by the key players of the scene and by the participants, by the choreographers, by the performance. But unfortunately, it has not given the historical credit and recognition that it deserves. So an experiment of mass theater, as defined by its founder, Hüseyin Katırcıoğlu, an artist and choreographer himself, the program included local and international artists, performance, visual artists, but also theater companies, dance companies. And they were invited to this small village on this Aegean coast for 3 weeks to produce site-specific works in the village in dialogue with the locals. And especially locals, children and men, participated in person in these theatrical activities and becoming actors themselves. And the daily life of the village actually like set the tone for a perfect background, I would say, for this theatrical pieces, making the village a part of the new works, commissioned works. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Amira. It's great to hear about that research. I think it really illustrates what you're talking about, really illustrates the importance of these projects that take a kind of a broad view on what was happening and don't just look through the kind of lens of the known exhibition histories but the spaces where, as you say, a lot of very more ephemeral practice was happening that may not have been captured or may not, like, is there a lot of documentation available of
I mean, like, yes, that's one of the saddest parts, because like we have like very limited video footage and very limited photography. So because like the focus of the artist was to create ephemeral works and to actually like act against the materialization of art. So most of the time we will like use I guess some photos that we have, but then like we will let's say take advantage of reenactments. I would say.
And you're saying that the research is to feed into an exhibition, which brings us into the contemporary context. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about the kind of position of these kind of projects within the SALT program, these kind of deep dive investigations into practice that was happening, and where that's in relation to the position of SALT as a public space and a civic space.
I mean, you know that like at SALT we mostly like do our exhibitions like driven out of curiosity, I would say, and to reflect on the I don't want to like use this cliche for Turkey as a land of contradictions, but it is a land of contradictions. But I'm not going to use the reference of bridge for that as it is like mainly used, but let's say like the curatorial choices of what we are doing in terms of like archival research or like in an art exhibition as well stems from what we don't know actually. So most of the time what we discover throughout the process surprises us as well. So we don't actually go into the research, into the field with some hypothetical prefixed ideas. So it's also like an ongoing process for us as well. So each day we are like coming across new performances. We are coming across new video footages if we are lucky. And the findings of one day actually challenges the findings of our of the first days of the first months of research. So it's like we put our energy like when we are doing the website as well, when we are doing the exhibition as well, like we are putting our energy to like reflect all these unknown and hidden parts of the history.
Yeah,
it surprises us as well as researchers.
Yeah. And Sebastian, if I could bring you in now to talk a little bit about your work in Warsaw, and thank you for joining us. And sorry for the confusion with time. I hope you're not too
No.
appearing. But the project that you, as part of the one of many Europe's project, one of your major exhibitions, Never Again, and the project that you're planning, I know for this autumn, that's looking at the role of Never Again, looking at kind of the role of art in anti-fascism and anti-war campaigns and the project that you're planning for the autumn that's looking at the role of practice in pro-choice and drawing, and I'm delighted to say, drawing on some collaboration we've been able to establish with Ireland. It's obviously very critical within your program to see how you as a museum are using research and this kind of historical lens to respond to some of the very urgent issues that you're facing within the context that you're working. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that and about those projects.
Yeah, first of all, like happy birthday to IMMA.
Thank
like
you.
I'm very much excited about also like being in this particular constellation of friends and allies. So this is really exciting. And sorry, my cats just joined me. So in the very moment. But yeah, so we are also like a kind of like a new kid on the block when it comes to the La Internazionale family. We just, it's our like first kind of phase, and we have to like learn and kind of adjust our kind of tools, our toolbox to all those programs. But of course, you can see when you look at our previous programs and those kind of long-term research trajectories, there are so many overlaps and similarities, and of course, like we knew all those institutions before and we collaborated. So basically we are trying to use this kind of flexibility of being an institution under construction. We are not only like the youngest institution in this family, but we're also like benefiting from like being this kind of like a new player, I would say, and so we can also like kind of camouflage some of our tactics, like which are more kind of direct. And so far the museum, which is quite scattered around the city, using different venues, kind of being this kind of like a nomadic entirety, we can be kind of like closer to certain movements, especially like feminist and anti-fascist and ecological movements, and our space is being used as a kind of like a safe space, so to speak, by such organizations as the Polish branch of Extinction Rebellion and so on. So this space is being kind of occupied all the time. Of course, we've been suffering a lot from this kind of pandemic hibernation and all those like social distancing regulations, but we are coming back. Like the museum has been reopened, and we are like kind of recalibrating our program again, and being a part of the La Internazionale Confederation also like gives us some like new opportunities of like being really honest, also like having programs which are not financed by the Polish Ministry of Culture, which might be used against us like in the future, so we can kind of be very, it's a very kind of Joe Biden style. Somebody just criticized him, one of the conservative Republican politicians, that he's so boring, but he's so radical, like so I guess this kind of method of being boring when it comes to kind of accuracy, when industriousness of like making your research, like working with historical materials, with the archives and showing all those like trajectories, it's really helps us to kind of stress up like very current kind of issues and manifestations. And the Never Again show, which you mentioned, I guess it wasn't even like a part of our application for the Internazionale, but like this problem became so urgent that we kind of recalibrated the initial concept. So we very often use like historical materials, like in the case of this exhibition, we used paintings by Alice Neal. Like we came back to this 1955 moment in Warsaw, with this big international youth festival, this kind of internationalism, cosmopolitanism extravaganza, with like thousands of delegates from Asia, Africa, South America, gathering, occupying the streets and like dancing, having parties, and also like with this involvement of artists who were kind of decorating the city using all those like anti-fascist symbols and using also like the ruins of like a heavily destroyed city, still kind of like they were like still kind of like bombed buildings like sticking out everywhere, and they were using it as kind of like scaffolds for the like canvases and making, for example, like a one-to-one replica of Guernica, like Wojciech van Gogh, this famous op artist. He made like a copy of the thing, just treating it as a kind of like a public domain anti-fascist kind of like thing, which it can be just stretched on a big ruined building. So but we, of course, like it's not only about like looking at art history with this certain filter, looking at the pacifist, anti-war, anti-fascist struggles and all those like movements and organizations, but of course it was like a kind of way of dealing with the present, dealing with the rise of like far right populism and the policy of Eastern European governments and anti-LGBT kind of campaigns and everything which we see like on billboards and posters, and we see those neo-Nazis like marching like during the Independence Day, and they are really they have gained such a visibility in the public sphere that we decided to it's I think it's a very efficient tool, like an art exhibition, when it comes to like bringing people together and discussing those kind of urgent, explosive issues, and make it boring somehow, like making it really like refined, like beautifully designed with the archives and all the details, biographies, it's boring but exciting. It's
really interesting, this idea of using the kind of rigor of research to allow certain conversations to happen and to kind of
absolutely create this kind of like an enclave, like where you can like really experience this kind of polyphony of voices, like it's not black and white, like it's also like you have like very kind of those very touching, those biographies. For example, like Maya Berezovska, we exhibited her drawings. She was one of the artists who ended up in the concentration camp in Ravensbrück. This kind of infamous place, this hellish kind of structure where she ended up for drawing caricatures of Adolf Hitler in the 30s, which were published by one of those satirical magazines in France. So she was like blacklisted. Then they found her in the 40s. So this artist like ended up for those those funny caricatures. And she kept drawing, being a prisoner, and it's a long story, like she ended up in Malmö Kunstmuseum, when like the museum was transformed into a refugee camp, in 1945, and then she kept drawing, like, so there's like a pile of her works in the museum in Malmö, but her drawings are like quite a, fierce, manifestation of her like anti-fascist kind of stance, like, and they are figurative, they are like beautiful. They can be treated as kind of illustrations for some kind of like fashion articles, because she always drew her friends in the camp in the most beautiful way. So they were kind of, like a little bit, like yeah, there was like a touch of fashion always, because those drawings were kind of smuggled to the families, like to prove that they're like, alive and kicking, So when you kind of set up such a kind of constellation of like references and stories and little biographies, you cannot say like, oh, you are just communists, like you're just like, because this is like the common kind of reaction, like being anti-fascist, you're considered as communists, I'm considered as a communist, which is, of course, I'm very happy to take this label. And so coming, so I guess there's like a kind of I wouldn't say like a style, but like this kind of methodology of making those historical shows in our museum. I can even see this kind of trilogy, like this Never Again, which was dealing with anti-fascism struggle, the Penumbral Age, which was a historical take on climate issues, like showing this kind of last 5 decades of this environmental consciousness and this incredible application of artistic tactics by such artists as Mirella Derman-Ilkilis, Bonnie Rasherk, Teresa Murak, all those like fantastic eco-feminists from the like late 60s and 70s, and then and the 90s are always there, like this is like this kind of like a bumpy road, like all of a sudden you're kind of stumbling against something, like when it comes to legal issues, when it comes to like economical kind of, transformations, when it comes to certain, it's like all those like, social issues and dilemmas, like, and those like global kind of shifts, like which affected us also like in Eastern Europe. So what you mentioned, Sarah, the upcoming exhibition is, I would say, is like the third chapter of this series, which is actually it's very much embedded, anchored in the 90s. It's the history of reproduction right, women rights, abortion rights struggle, and I also have to say that I have never spent so much time on like Zooms and Google Meets with friends, with Irish friends now, like I have like dozens of new Irish friends, all those fantastic women, like all those fighters.
Wonderful.
And we are like, I just
great outcome of internationality just there. It's just great that we were able to make that connection, and
it's incredible, like, because when you see at those at the aesthetics of like those, like marches, at the, like legal, those loopholes, and like this, the role of the Roman Catholic Church, like this evil kind of way of like dismantling the existing like legal solutions and so on. So this is like, in Poland, this is like the legacy of the 90s. Yeah, it was like this moment between 1989 and 1993 when they really managed to kind of like shift the like turn, this process, which was kind of labeled as the abortion compromise, which was like one of the harshest legal regulations in Europe, but now it's it's like a total ban on abortion. And then so we look at the 90s, but we are also like trying to kind of we want to also like create this kind of uplifting kind of, like scenario, and looking at so victorious cases as the referendum in Argentina, and then the situation, the Irish, of course, scenario is like we are learning a lot, like from Cecily, Rachel, and all those like fantastic artists.
It's great
and
that kind of connection is strengthening again, because actually one of the things we uncovered in the research we did as part of the Aftereffects project in NCAD was the strength of connection between Poland and Ireland, between artists during that time, and huge networks, and also a lot of like with the Women on Waves project, there was a lot of connection between activism in the pro-choice movement between Poland and Ireland. So it's great that kind of relationship has continued. You mentioned when we were talking about that project before, that sort of that it's one that's slightly fraught with difficulty for you now, and you referenced just the value of the Internationale project as giving you a degree of independence. Like, how difficult is it to think about this kind of programming currently as a state-funded institution in Ireland? I mean, in Poland.
Yeah, it's a kind of death penalty scenario, I would say, for an institution. But it's we are like preparing ourselves for this inferno kind of. It's if you touch such issues, it will kind of explode in your hands. Like, of course, and so we can kind of like mask it with like with a lot of like historical materials, and with like this kind of more biographical kind of art historical touch. But in the end, like you will see those like photos from from current demonstrations. Like we have this archive of public protests, and which is absolutely amazing. What I can really compare it only to those like Latin American archives. Like I can really see that those like really professional fashion and like journal photographs kind of shifted. Like they just said, oh, no, this is the moment to be like a civic photographer, like to document every single protest, like to kind of write down this history in images. And they are fantastic photos. They are like super sexy, like it's protests have never looked so good, like with all those, costumes and banners and very funny slogans. Yeah, I have to say, like the main slogan of those demonstrations is "Get the fuck out." This is the main motto of the slogan. So it's like those young people, they're not like behaving, like it's really quite evident that this is like this amount of like rage and sadness, and also like courage is like tangible. So yeah, it's we feel that this is like our obligation, and we have been somehow recognized as an ally by those pro-choice movements during the second lockdown. In the very there's like this momentum, this peak of demonstrations when like 200,000 people like marched in Warsaw, and with torches, like really like appropriating all the worst kind of hooligan kind of like tactics, and it's kind of choreographies, which was fantastic, like blocking the cars and like spraying like very vulgar like nasty slogans on the pavement and everything. There was a group of like young female like activists and artists who started to install this kind of huge pile of banners and slogans in front of our museum. There was like a group of people who didn't feel like comfortable, like they were like afraid of marching with the crowd and confronting those neo-Nazis and so on. And they say they want to like manifest their statements in the front of a museum, but not like any museum. It's like our museum, and it's like we were like, you know, it was like a very touching moment because like you had like this, you know, all the trees were decorated, and it was like tons of slogans. I mean it, you know, because we like we have them in our storage room now, so we keep those banners, you know. Like I guess I hope it will be kind of NCAD kind of situation when one day we'll like digitize everything and we'll like look at it and kind of analyze it and we'll put it on our website and so on. But so far it's like kept, yes. And so I don't know, it's a kind of, you know, it's a kind of obligation, you know. We might be like, you know, decapitated or whatever, but it's I guess it's like it makes sense in our program.
Yeah.
You know, it's we'll have like a number of very beautiful historical works which make this particular show quite like wonderful, like, you know, Anna Mendieta's works and you know, Paula Rego, I hope, you know, maybe those two pastel works might be coming to us. And we have works from the 90s, and we are very close to getting some banners from Dublin. So brilliant. It's the so the textiles, and Rachel Fallon is making 2 new aprons for us with slogans in Polish.
Wow.
So yeah, so it will be which will be also like activated, you know, like so a part of the show might be just taken to the streets, and so if we like face the 4th lockdown, it doesn't really matter, we can just take the works outside, you know.
I'm just, thank you so much, Sebastian, and I'm just a little bit conscious of time, but I've asked a lot of questions. I think you probably might have questions of each other, and so I wanted to add a little bit because I've been dictating the conversation, but also just to say to those who are joining us, if you want to put any questions into the Q&A, I will keep an eye on that and bring those to the panel.
My only question is just when are these, if I know COVID dependent, but when is your show on supposed to happen in SALT, and also the one in Warsaw?
So the exhibition at SALT, like we will open the the website this year at the end of this year, and hopefully if everything goes okay, and like if the pandemic allows us to do on-site performances and reenactments, so the exhibition will start next year on March or April.
Fantastic! I really want to come.
Yeah, our show is due to open on the 19th of November, so it's a kind of rapid reaction thing, you know. Yeah. But it's coming. Yeah. It's like even, you know, if we don't get all those loans, we can just open the space.
Got an interesting question here for you, Annie. Thanking all the panelists, so thank you all very much. But what themes does Annie see the institution tackling after the anniversary programme that engage with the contemporary? Will IMMA's focus be as global given the changes brought about by COVID-19 and reduced travel? Is that something that it'd be interesting to see what everyone's thinking in relation to that, but is that something you're really seeing as having an impact on future programs?
Yes and no. I mean, I definitely think we're slowing down programming a bit more, just because, again, you know, the trauma of trying to bring those big global shows in and them getting stuck and all that. So I think it is an interesting time to kind of reinvent. It's where these networks are so important, because the idea of not being connected and not, you know, the fluidity around our kind of international dialogues are just vital. We're going to do quite a big Otolith group show. It's a show that I started in the Vanaba in 2019, and it's going to Sharjah now at the moment, and it's been all over the place. So it's finally going to come to Dublin in 2022. So I suppose it will be about finding that balance. There's a big show that we want to do in 23, which is trying to look at that idea of really the 1920s. So it's kind of based on the idea of commemoration but I'm kind of interested in that idea of self-determination as this endlessly changing term that was obviously allied to the nation state and new democracies in the 20s, and how artists have always articulated ideas of self-determination in relation to indeed what we're just talking about, either solidarities or activisms or claiming kind of political space. So yeah, I'm just planning another big whopper of kind of research show. We're just trying to get our time for that. So I suppose I'm always interested in putting the Irish experience in some kind of narrative form at the center of those research shows, if possible. And then yeah, just perhaps taking more time with those research shows and leaving them up for longer if we can kind of, but I've yet to see it. I feel like I've had so little time of the museum being open since I came here to kind of understand how long you can keep things up or what kind of tempo we should have. But I certainly feel like I'm slowing down and engaging with the research and the archive is really exciting.
Interesting to see as we kind of come through this, in particular as we sort of think back to the 90s, because one of the things that sort of stands out from that is this intense kind of productivity and kind of sense of everything having to be, as you said, Annie, the now, the new, and us all flying on Ryanair continuously to kind of experience that and be part of that, and whether ways in which we think globally and connect globally will shift into different kinds of conversations, not always this kind of constant travel, but also this slowing down of pace and slowing down of productivity to a perhaps more kind of considered and reflective position in programming. I think we will start to see that.
Yeah.
Is that something, Amira and Sebastian, you're thinking about in terms of your program, or too early to say?
Maybe you go first, Sebastian.
I don't think any of us know anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be too early. It's also like, for us, it's a kind of like a double kind of paradox, because we are opening as an institution, like as a museum in our final seat in 2 years. So it's also like affects, like what we are planning, and they're like those two different tempos of speeds of what we are doing and planning. And we had to also, of course, like cancel some programs, but at the same time, we are pretty kind of, we adjust quite fast. And I really like this, also like this kind of biological term of an endospore, like you have this kind of form of a being which doesn't breathe, doesn't grow and like limbs or something. It just tries to survive, like so sometimes it's kind of hibernated, like all it does only important things, so we are very much focused now on this new building. Like it's growing, and this lockdown period kind of sped up the whole process, because like it was not interrupted by anybody and anything, and it was kind of all those like walls were kind of mushrooming up, and now it's like I can see it. So I'm like mainly like crawling in the maquette, like 1 to 20 maquettes, playing with those like 3D printouts of works and trying to squeeze Cathy Wilkes installation, for example, in our like rooms. And so we're like working on the first shows, which is basically like the collection exhibition, and I think all those like things and themes which we mentioned will be quite like tangible there. And so like my section like goes from the 50s and from the like socialist realism to black protest, like feminist protest. So it's like all about like like the old theme of like Internationale, the uses of art, like there are like different uses of art.
Fantastic.
So I believe like SALT was a bit luckier than the other institutions during the pandemic. Of course, we have two venues, as like some of you know, in Istanbul. So of course, we had like a change in the plans in terms of like scheduling. So cooking sections exhibition that has recently opened in Istanbul at SALT Beyoğlu was actually originally scheduled for last year. But like we had like almost like a year delay. But happily they are like in the Turner Prize list this year. So maybe we were luckier. I don't know. Like, no, but like, so aside the jokes, but like this year marks the 10th year of SALT as well. So
happy birthday, SALT.
Happy birthday, IMMA, and happy birthday, SALT. So, so like the 10th year means that like we are also making like minor shifts maybe in the programming. So like this year was we wanted to commission like a younger generation of Turkish artists. So we have this program titled The Sequential on SALT Galata, which is like the venue that we mostly use for archival exhibitions. So this was a change. So now we are having the cooking sections exhibition. But in terms of the pandemic, as I said, maybe we can feel a bit luckier because SALT doesn't have a permanent like collection of artworks, as you do know, but like we do have a collection of archives, and this is mostly like curators, artists, or architects archive, but we do also have like an archive that constitutes of like documents related to social and political and economic history of Turkey since 1980s, so 1950s, yeah. So so all these archives, like most of them are like in the digital space, accessible to all, like globally. So like the SALT archives, even though like the venues are closed due to pandemic, so all the archives are open to access. So in terms of the like digital space that we have, like that's why I feel a bit more like I feel a bit luckier than the rest of the institutions who are relying on their physical, actually, like I would say, presence.
Probably all going to see that kind of mix more and more. Well, I'm going to thank you all very, very much for joining us this afternoon. And thank you to our audience who joined us as well. It was lovely to see you all. And Sebastian and Amira, Sebastian, I was saying at the beginning, the plan originally was for you all to be in Dublin. I know you were in Dublin with Livia a few years ago, but it would be nice to imagine there would be a face-to-face discussion as well. But good luck.
It's coming soon. Coming soon. This reunion of real people in a mixed space.
So great.
The week of the lockdown was the last time I saw Annie in person, so it's kind of even in Dublin we're in a virtual conversation. But really nice to see you both, and such a pleasure to hear you all talk about the forthcoming programs, and good luck with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks for such a lovely program. I really enjoyed the last few weeks.
And thank you to all the speakers over the last 5 weeks of Aftereffects, and to Kira and Alyssa, who've done a brilliant job curating the program. And lovely to see you all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.